You know how sometimes when you move into a new place, you expect it to be a happy experience. You're not thinking about the past, the people who lived there before, or what might still be lingering, but sometimes it feels like you are the guest in your own home. Kyle learned that the hard way. He moved into his new house in 2021, a cozy little place built in 1954. It wasn't much. It didn't need to be. He was just looking for somewhere quiet, somewhere to call his own. It was him, his dog, and a whole lot of space, all to himself. But something wasn't right from the beginning. A few weeks in, little things started happening. The lights would flicker, then they'd go out. He'd fix them, and the next day, the same thing. It wasn't the wiring. He checked. The doors? They started closing on their own, not with the wind or the draft. These doors would slam. It was unnerving, but that wasn't the worst of it. One night, Kyle was sitting at the kitchen island. It was just him, his dog curled up on the floor, and the silence of the house around him. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator in the corner. And then, it happened out of nowhere. A cold hand wrapped around his torso. It wasn't a tap. It wasn't a brush. It was firm, like someone or something was gripping him. Kyle froze. His heart pounded in his chest. He spun around, but there was nothing. Nothing except his dog, staring at empty space with wide, terrified eyes. That was when Kyle knew. Something was here, but he didn't want to believe it. He tried to convince himself it was just stress. Maybe a bad dream, but that wasn't the end of it. The smell started. First, it was faint, a whiff of cigarette smoke, old and stale, cutting through the air when Kyle would least expect it. He'd searched the house, his heart racing, but there was no source, no ashtray, no cigarette, and just when he thought it was over, it would return. Then, perfume. Strong, sweet. It wasn't a pleasant smell, more like something that had been buried in the walls for decades. It had hit him when he was sitting still, at the kitchen table or in the living room. He'd turn his head, but nothing. The air would be still. It was like the house was alive, playing tricks on him. But Kyle wasn't the only one who started noticing. His mom came to visit one weekend. She stayed in the guest bedroom, just for a night. It was supposed to be a short trip, but early the next morning, while she was getting ready in the bathroom, she heard it. A voice, a whisper, soft but clear. His mom froze. "Mary," she heard, just like that. Someone had called her name. She looked around, but the bathroom was empty. No one was there. Now Kyle hadn't told her anything about the strange happenings in the house. He didn't want to sound crazy, but when he asked her about her night, she just stared at him, her face pale. "I heard someone call my name," she said, but there was no one there. That was the first time Kyle considered the possibility that maybe he wasn't imagining things, but he still held on to the hope that it was just his mind playing tricks. Then came Jake, his best friend. Jake had stayed over one night, just crashing in the guest room. The next morning, Jake came out of the bathroom looking like he'd seen a ghost. I backed up into someone," Jake said. "I thought you were right behind me, but there was no one there." Again, Kyle hadn't said a word. He hadn't told Jake about the strange happenings, but Jake knew. He felt it too. Something was in that house. But the strangest thing of all, the AirPods case. Kyle was sitting in the kitchen, doing nothing out of the ordinary. His dog was asleep by the door. The house was still, and everything felt calm for the first time in days. And then, out of nowhere, the AirPods case flew off the kitchen counter, slamming against the floor. Kyle just stared at it. His pulse raced. The air in the room felt thick, like the house itself was holding its breath. He didn't know what to think. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe he had bumped it. But deep down he knew. The house wasn't just haunted. It was alive. It was watching him, waiting for him to slip up. And here's the thing. Kyle wasn't scared in the way most people would be. It wasn't that he felt threatened. No, it was worse than that. It was the feeling that the house wasn't unaware of him, that something, some presence, was waiting. Kyle's not sure what to do anymore. He still lives in the house. He hasn't left. He doesn't feel unsafe, not exactly. But he knows that he's not alone. He can feel it every time he walks into a room, or when the lights flicker, or when that strange, cold perfume fills the air. You ever hear a story and just know it's real? Not because someone tells you, but because it sticks with you. Deep down. That's what happened to me. My sister Sarah used to live in this old house in England. Not just any old house, but a house that was over 1,000 years old. Yeah, you heard that right. 1,000 years. It wasn't some charming cottage. It was a beast of a place. Stone walls thick enough to make your bones ache, with a history that felt like it was pressing down on you. When Sarah first told me about the weird stuff happening in the house, I'll admit, I thought she was losing it. She'd say things like, "The ghost took my keys again," or "I found the laundry in the wrong room," like she was joking. Maybe she was just stressed. The house was huge, old, and full of creaks and groans. Things get moved around. It's an old house. I didn't think much of it. But then one day I visited her, and that's when everything changed. I remember standing there at the foot of the stairs. It was just after dinner. Me, Sarah, her 2 teenage daughters, and the dog. The house felt off, quiet but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of silence that makes your skin itch. Sarah's face was pale, like she'd seen a ghost. She didn't even look at me when she said it. "It's here." I laughed. I thought she was messing with me. I had to. The way she said it. I figured maybe she was playing one of her games, but no. She was dead serious. I looked up the stairs. The air was thick. Everything in that house always felt heavy, but this was different. Sarah pointed to the landing. I followed her finger, and there, hovering about 3 feet off the ground, was a ball of light. It wasn't just light, it was strange. It was like it was made of little fractals, swirling in patterns I couldn't understand. It was about the size of a soccer ball, and it was moving. No, not moving. Gliding down the stairs past us, slowly, almost like it knew we were there. Sarah's dog was the first one to react. It went still, hackles raised, staring up at that light like it was hunting it. I've never seen the dog act like that. It wasn't barking, it wasn't jumping. It was just locked on the light, watching, growling low in its chest. I didn't know what to do. My brain was working overtime, trying to figure out what was going on. Some kind of trick, maybe? But the air didn't feel right. It felt like the world itself was holding its breath. I could feel a light wind brush past me, like a draft, but it wasn't cold. It wasn't from a window or door, it was just there. And then that ball of light floated right past us into the living room, and it disappeared. I don't know why, but I immediately turned to my nieces. I asked them, told them to write down everything they had seen. I didn't want to talk about it. I just wanted them to write it down separately. No one was allowed to say anything until it was on paper. They were confused, but they did it anyway. I did it too. It was crazy, I know. But I had to see if we all saw the same thing. We all wrote the same thing. Every detail. The light, how it moved, the feeling in the air, the dog's reaction, everything. It was like we had all seen the same thing, together. And that was when I knew. I couldn't explain it. I didn't know what it was. But whatever it was real. And I never doubted Sarah again. I still don't know what that light was. I don't know what it wanted or why it was there. But one thing I do know, I don't think I could ever step foot in that house again. I haven't experienced anything like that since, and part of me hopes I never do. But I'll tell you this, there's something in that house. Something old. Something that doesn't care about logic or reason. And whatever it is, it's been there far longer than any of us. Sleep tight. Just make sure you lock your doors. My grandma's house was always more than just a place. It was a force. If you knew her, you'd understand. She was tough, sharp, never one to back down. When she passed away, everything just stopped. The house stayed locked up for years, untouched. It stayed exactly how she left it. 10 years went by before I finally decided to buy it. I thought it would be a simple project. Clean it up, maybe make it a home again. But when I stepped inside for the first time, it felt like the house was still holding on to something. The air was thick, like it hadn't been aired out in a decade. The furniture was exactly where she left it, her perfume still lingering, even her wig sitting in the same spot like she might walk back in any minute. That first night it was sweltering hot, but my kids, being kids, decided to have some fun. They put on Grandma's fancy robes, her jewelry, even her wigs. It was all fun and games until it wasn't. Around 3 a.m., my 19-year-old daughter came running into our room, crying, shaking. She was terrified. "There was a woman standing at the end of my bed," she said. She told us it got freezing cold in her room out of nowhere. And when she sat up to pull the covers up, there was a woman just standing there, staring at her. We tried to laugh it off, told her she was just imagining things, but she refused to go back to that room. She slept in our bed for the rest of the night. After that, she wouldn't go back to her room, not even for a second. It was like the bed had become cursed. The next night, my husband woke up asking who was in the hallway. He thought it was one of the kids, but when he checked, there was no one there. He swore he saw someone in a robe walking toward the bathroom. Of course, he tried to explain it away, blaming headlights from a passing car, but I wasn't so sure. A few weeks passed in silence. Things seemed quiet, almost normal. Until one night, my daughter woke up to the smell of coffee and burnt toast, just like Grandpa used to make. No one was in the kitchen, though. It was a smell that had to be coming from somewhere, but it wasn't real. Then a couple of days later, she came back from our cousin's house with an old family photo. She pointed to a woman in the picture. "That's the lady who was at the end of my bed," she said. My daughter had never met my grandmother. She didn't even know what she looked like, but there she was, the same woman. I knew something had to change. So one day I went down to the basement, to the place where Grandma always used to sit. I told her gently that it was time to move on. I told her I loved her and I'd take care of the house, but the kids didn't need to be scared anymore. After that day, it went quiet. No more strange smells. No more figures standing at the end of beds. It was like she finally heard me. I can't say for sure she left. Maybe she's still here, in some corner of that house. But things have been peaceful since then. It's strange how some houses hold on to their past, how memories linger, but sometimes they don't have to haunt you. I grew up in a house that was haunted. I don't mean it in the way you hear about on ghost shows where people hear creaks or see shadows. No, this was real. I mean real. I know people like to explain things away. "Oh, it's just the house settling," or "You're probably just sleep deprived." But I've seen it all. And when I say I saw it, I mean there's no other way to explain it. The house had a history. It wasn't pretty. The previous owners had lost a 2-year-old child there. I never knew the details, and honestly, I didn't want to. But I didn't need to know them to feel it. The air in that house, it was different. The kind of air that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up, even when you were alone. But the real stuff started happening after we moved in. It was subtle at first. Little things. Things you could explain away if you wanted to. A creak here, a flicker of a light there. But then there were the handprints. I remember the first time I saw them. I was cleaning my room, wiping down my mirror, and there they were. Tiny handprints, smudged like a child had pressed their hands to the glass. But here's the thing, I was the youngest in the house. My hands were much larger than those prints. There was no way they could have been mine, and they weren't there the night before. I thought maybe I'd missed them. Maybe I was just imagining things. But no, every week without fail, I'd wipe those little handprints off the mirror. Like clockwork, they would appear again. Sometimes they'd be higher, sometimes lower, but they were always there. At first, I tried to tell myself it was some kind of weird coincidence. Maybe a neighbor's toddler was sleepwalking, sneaking into our house in the dead of night, dragging a step stool into my room to touch the mirror, then putting it back and locking the door behind them. Yeah, that makes sense, right? Except no, that didn't happen. And it wasn't just the handprints. The house had a way of messing with you. The blinds would open by themselves, slamming against the windows, like someone was standing there watching. The doors would close hard, slamming shut like they were being forced by an unseen hand. But it wasn't the wind, I can tell you that much. You don't hear wind slamming doors shut. And the worst part? The more attention I paid to it, the worse it got. I'd be sitting there in my room, trying to ignore it, but then the blinds would snap open, or the door would bang closed with no one there. Every time my heart would race. But I knew one thing. The more I reacted, the more it happened. The more you paid attention to it, the more it would happen. At one point, I thought I'd lost it. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I was just imagining things. But the evidence kept mounting up. The little handprints on the mirror, the slammed doors, the blinds swinging open in the middle of the night when there was no breeze. It wasn't just coincidence. I remember standing in that hallway thinking, what the hell is going on here? I'd look down the stairs into the dark, and I'd swear I saw something moving, like someone was there, just out of sight. But when I turned, nothing was ever there. Nothing but the house itself. Here's my advice if you ever find yourself in a place like that. Just ignore it. Don't give it attention. Because the more you react, the more it'll feed on you. The more it will find new ways to mess with you. It's like it knows when you're scared, when you're watching, when you're looking for answers, and it will just get worse. But if you ignore it, if you let it be, it'll quiet down. It'll stop, at least for a while. Just don't go looking for answers, because you might find something you weren't ready for. And trust me, sometimes it's better not to know.